Hello, my name is Dale Adams of Planning Ahead of Time, and today on this Pat Chat, I'm speaking to Dishi Attwood. Dishi, would you like to introduce yourself and maybe how we met?
Hi, my name's Dishi Attwood. I'm a Soroptimist, and I had a stand at the Chamber of Commerce Expo in Kenilworth, and Dale came along and stopped to have a chat, and we ended up talking about end of life within no time at all, and since then have met again, and we've made a connection. I'm very happy to be connected to Dale.
Yeah, it's quite amazing how I can turn any conversation into one about end of life. I think it's a skill, but not everybody I talk to appreciates it really. But actually, you and I had a lovely chat about it, and from both sides, because you introduced me to Soroptimists, which I'd never heard of, and have since been to a meeting invited by you, and am joining the group. Again, you'll say it a lot better than me, but what do Soroptimists do?
It's a women's organisation, and most cities have clubs in them, cities and towns. And our work is the advancement of women and girls. And our particularly our unique position is that we have consultative status at the United Nations. So all the work we do for the good of women and girls is reported into the United Nations, and so can influence government policy. And that's the bit that's different for us. And our work, the action that we do, is always practical, and it could be local, national, international, because we're a global organisation. But yeah, you just need to come along to a meeting and find out more.
We will definitely give out the contact details at the end, but I went to a meeting and I'm Leamington based, and Helping Hands is a Leamington organisation being currently supported for its Esther project by Soroptimists. And one of the ladies who'd been part of that project and lived in Esther House, which supports women who've had very, very difficult times, let's just put it that way, told some of her story. And it was really emotive to hear about how she'd gone from dreadful circumstances to now being at university, and she looked fantastic. She was doing really, really well. And her comment was, without Esther House, and obviously, again, the support that Soroptimist is giving to it, which is lovely, she wouldn't be here. She absolutely stated there she would not be here without the Helping Hands, obviously, and what they're doing. And that comes from support from organisations like yours.
I think that we try very hard to get into the heart of each story, heart of each person, and try and make sure that we're supporting in the way that they need, not what we think they should do, but what their aspiration is and how they want to go forward. And so the stories are absolutely legion. And of course, every little action, is multiplied throughout the world. And I would say we're an organisation that makes a massive difference, supporting women and girls. And growing up as a Sikh with my mum, the Sikh culture is very much about service. So when I joined the Soroptimists, not knowing a great deal about it, and when I was telling my mum about it, she was very, very enthusiastic about my membership, because she said, you're doing exactly what you should be doing, which is, you've been given the gift of life, use it for the benefit of others.
Well, your mom, we've obviously met up a couple of times for coffee and things. Your mom sounds like an amazing lady. She was very ahead of her times with her thinking, and quite a force with her kindness, really, is what gave her that, I think, from what I've heard from you.
Yeah, she was very much, she was widowed at 28 in a foreign country and had to bring up two children in a foreign world, but in fact gave both of us every opportunity. And education was really high on her list. And I was always a sickly child, and she always said, you'll never be any good for manual labor. You better get educated, and that's what I did. Very, very supportive of me and my education at a time when other Asian families were asking their daughters to leave school at 16. and go to work to help pay for the weddings. So very, very ahead of her time and very compassionate. And as time went on, her Sikh faith became a huge part of her life. And every morning she would go to the temple and help in the kitchen. And she became the person that everybody went to for recipes, guidance, help. And she would do anything she could to help those people. And what they really appreciated was that it never went any further. And it wasn't until she died that I learned of what she'd been up to in this context.
But this is what I found so fascinating, and it was why we ended up in a very deep conversation very quickly at the expo, and then we'll meet up again at another time to carry on the conversation, was because really her life was celebrated so much at her death and her end of life. And I found it incredible with the way that, as in your faith, that you actually cope with death. And really, it was just so moving. Maybe you could share some of it. I found it quite amazing.
Well, the Sikh faith reminds you all the time that although you're living every day, you're dying a little bit every day. So there's an end to your life. You're not going to be here forever. It's very much about, yes, you've got to live in this world, and it's okay to be comfortable and do the things that you need to do. But actually, you're preparing for your next life because that's your permanent home. This is only temporary. And a lot of the time, my mum would say to us, life is a gift that you're given. Good fortune is a gift, and it can just as easily be taken away. So you need to value what you've been given and use it for the good of others. And that's how she lived her life. So widowed at 28 in a culture which is very much externally a very male culture, she had to really, it was quite difficult for her to keep herself safe and keep the family honor. But she did it. And she did it for her children, and she did it to make sure her children understood the importance of the gift of life.
Well,
And
if
so
everybody had that view, what a different world we would live in.
what a different world. And so there's things like, birthdays. We all celebrate birthdays and say, oh, I'm now 50, I'm now 60. But actually, what you're marking is time past. And you have no idea of how much time you've got ahead of you. So you're almost celebrating a bit of dying. And for us, the conversation...
I've never heard it put like that, but actually, it is in fact true, isn't it?
It is. And so all the time that every day of your life, death is not something to be feared. It's not something that is unexpected. It is what it is. And then within the culture, there are protocols laid down of what you do when somebody dies. And so there's a process, if you hear that somebody's died, then, off you go, you pay your respects, and you're expected to go there. And the family are expected to be there to hear you talk about the person that's died. Now, for my mom, she was a great force in the temple. She died when she was 94. And up until 6 months before then, she'd been going to the temple every single day to work in the kitchen and do the jobs. And I used to say to her, don't do too much because you're using up all your lifetime, save some so we have you for longer. So, and then in the last 3 months of her life, she became unable, she still did all her self-care with help, but she was unable to cook for herself because she found standing difficult. And she got a diagnosis of cancer, which was really unexpected, and instead 3 to 6 months. So I moved in with her because her house was better suited to her care than ours. And in fact, her grandson said to me, I'll do the weekends, my sister's boy, you do the week and I'll do the weekends. And we had the most terrific 3 months. She lasted 3 months. And we had the most terrific 3 months where we made all the arrangements for her funeral, because we talked to her, what is it you want? You know, we don't know what it is that needs to happen. And one of the things is that when you go on the day of the funeral to the temple, there are certain materials that have to be given. Then sort of a set of garments for the person who takes the funeral, and then a cover for the holy book, and all of these things. And she said, and she used to say to me, write it down. And she sent me to the shop that I used to take her to buy these materials in readiness for her funeral. And I went to the shop and I said, my mum's given me this list. And the girl behind the counter cried, and she said, has she died? And I said, oh no, not yet. She just wanted to make sure everything was ready. And
That's
so
fantastic. That's how I think it should be.
yes. And the meal that was served, she chose it. And then all the different payments that had to be made, we put them into envelopes to give to the different people. So the 3 months she was ill, she was very stoic. So I think that probably she wasn't as well as she made out. But then the most amazing thing was, you know, we did all the prayers, the morning prayers, the evening prayers, and I was there with her. And then we didn't realize, but one weekend, I was there on the Saturday and she said, don't go home. And on the Sunday, she said, I want to wear these clothes today. And she'd invited, we'd been asked to ask a priest to come along and do a prayer that she'd asked for. So at about 1 o'clock, there she is, all dressed and in her hospital bed, because she was quite poorly. And he came and he opened his book, and we're all sitting round, key people, and he started reading and went on for an hour, and it was a bit confusing. And then he said, this is chapter 1, and there are 22 chapters. And my mum turned to him and she said, this isn't what I asked for. I can tell you what's in every chapter of the 22. I asked you for this. And so he said, was she sure? Now, we didn't understand the significance of this. Was she sure? And she said, yes, come back tomorrow and do the prayer I've asked for. So off he went, and he came back the next day and he did the most beautiful prayer. And she said, thank you very much. He didn't want to leave her. He could feel the spirituality of my mum. Didn't want to leave her, but he went. And then 2 hours later, she died. And the moment before she died, she'd got pictures of her gurus on the wall, you know, Guru Nanak and Guru Gobind Singh. And she looked at them and she just smiled and she died. She was going to the place that she'd been getting ready for all her life. And it was the most wonderful experience to be there. And my sister was there as well. And my sister said to her, you can hear the drumbeat, can't you? She said, you go and we'll be following on behind. And it was incredible. But then, so I've not cried about my mum dying, because why would I? Yeah. This was what she'd been working her whole life for. She was going to go and be with her gurus to her permanent resting place. But what was incredible afterwards was that the next day you put sheets on the floor, so everybody sits on the floor in case you haven't got enough chairs, and people started arriving, and you do that until the day of the funeral. You have an open door, people leave their shoes in the doorway, come in, sit down, and they come and talk about the person who's died. And that's when I really found out what a difference my mum had made to so many people. And I remember saying, I thought she was our mum, hadn't realised she'd been a mum to so many. And generally, when you go to these things and you have a little cry with the person who's bereaved, and then after a while you say, how's your son doing at university, and haven't seen you for a long time, With my mum, the only topic of conversation was my mum. There were so many stories. And we did this for a week. And then a week later, she had her funeral. She'd lived in the house for 65 years. She'd said, "Your dad left me here. I want to leave from here." And she did. And so that week, it just filled us with such joy that she'd made such a difference in her life to so many people without us knowing. The people arrived that we'd never met before. And they said, "Oh, we used to see your mum, you know, we saw her often," but only in the temple or when she was out and about. Her home was always for her and her children.
I just think it's such a beautiful way to honor somebody. And I find that when I spoke to you, and I got goosebumps again when you were talking, you know, that's how it makes me feel, which is just, this is such a spiritual way of approaching death. And considering what you've just said about not crying, I find that people put their own grief onto you. So with my mum, I spent that month with her all the time when she was in hospital, and the last week I literally slept in the same hospital bed as her for the final week of her life. I know the circumstances were very different from your mum. My mum obviously was sort of younger and unfortunately had got injured and had dementia. So this was the circumstance that I found myself in. But I really look back on that time as such a beautiful gift. And I think when people's lives are they die very quickly or instantly without that, I think it's really important to have that time, if you can, and appreciate the gift that it is, but also then knowing that they've gone on to another life. And my belief is there is something beyond this physical world. And as you've said, even however we look at it, it doesn't matter if your view and mine is different, we're all still looking that there is something beyond this, something spiritual beyond this. But when you talk about people actually just coming into your home and being able to cry with you and talk with you, I think that's something that we don't do enough of, certainly in the UK, because people don't seem to know what to say. And
No.
actually they avoid you rather than coming in to speak to you.
Well, I still remember my neighbour when we lived in Solihull, her mum died. And I still can't forgive myself for not being there for her. And it was exactly that. I didn't know what she expected. If it was an Indian family, I knew exactly what I needed to do. But with Meg, did I need to leave her to her grief? Was it that it was only family? When did I speak to her? Did I speak to her at all? And that was years ago, and I still carry that with me. Whereas within the Sikh community, you're told what to do. And so there are no decisions to be made. You know what you're doing. And by going and visiting the family, you're honoring the person's life, the person that's died. And so in conversation, we talk about death much more because that's what we're saying. You know, we're getting ready for something, and that something is our permanent home. All that we've got here is temporary. And I think if you can get into that mindset, and you know, people have written books about the power of now. Well, that's what my mum lived, and that's what she put into us. Now is the important bit, because what's already done is gone, and you've got no idea what's coming next. So she lived her life, you know, in exactly the way that she wanted, and she had huge independence because she was a widow, so there was no husband sort of telling her. And her death was the most, if ever I wanted a demonstration of faith, I got it with my mum that day. And it was, I'd be forever grateful that I had those 3 months with her. And I was able to really understand everything about her. And I feel that's the gift she's given me.
Which you couldn't ask for more than that, can't you?
I couldn't ask for more.
To be given forward. But no, it was just a lovely story, and I'm so glad that you've come to speak to me and share it with other people, obviously, because planning ahead of time is that. The one question I will ask you is, you had that 3 months, and in that time, even when your mum was 94, you then did the planning. Do you feel, had you not had the time to plan, that it would have been very different, the end of your mum's life, and how you feel moving forward from that?
I think that we were really lucky, but you know, the day that my mum died, she decided that she was dying that day. She was going to die the day before, but the priest got the wrong prayer, so she waited. Um, I feel very privileged that we were able to do that. If we hadn't have done that, I wouldn't have been fulfilling her wishes, and her wishes were exactly what needed to be fulfilled. And I think now I would be wanting to do end of life planning. I would want to have those conversations, and I'd want myself, for myself, I'd want to say, this is what I think should happen. And obviously my husband is English, and he has a problem in that he says, do you want an Indian funeral or an English funeral? You know, so he's quite torn. But I think that the more we talk about dying, the more we take the fear out of it, and the more we appreciate the days that we're living.
I completely agree with you. Hence why I am now working in the end of life and trying to help people actually consider planning ahead for it. Again, that's come from my own experiences, which is how it works, isn't it, really? You have these experiences and then you want to try and help others go through it in a more positive way, I suppose. I also believe that people can delay their death a little bit. I think the same with my mum. If she'd have died 2 days earlier, it would have been my daughter's birthday. And my nan died on my mum's birthday. And my mum said it forever changed her birthday, knowing that that was the day that her mother-in-law had died. And so I knew that she would not die on my daughter's birthday. And as it was getting closer, I have to admit, I did have a little bit of a panic. And then my daughter had got a weekend of events planned. And so also my brother was in Canada and he was away for a month with his family. And I was talking to my mum about this, you know, while admittedly she couldn't communicate back to me, but I knew she could understand what I was saying. So I was sort of talking to her about this, and, you know, Max would be available from such and such day, he'd be back. And my daughter, it was her birthday. And she waited, and my daughter, the Friday was my daughter's birthday. The Saturday, my daughter had a day of plans for her birthday and was out on the Saturday evening. And my brother was flying home on the Sunday, and she died on the Sunday morning. And I absolutely 100% believe that she wouldn't have died on the days that my daughter was celebrating her birthday, because she didn't want to ruin it, and she also didn't want to ruin my brother's trip to Canada. So when all of her life support as such was taken away, or feeding tubes, etc., life sustaining, I should say, were taken away, they expected her to last 2, maximum of 5 days, and she lasted 10. And I believe it was solely to get through those markers so that she didn't leave that effect behind. And I know that my daughter will celebrate her birthday this year perfectly as she would normally, and not affected by the death of mom. So I do think that can happen. I very much agree that, you know, what you've said about your mom, certainly when the backstory and other things about your mom, I think it sounds like it's exactly what she would do. All
Yes, she made sure the timing was right. And in fact, it was at the point where she wasn't going to be able to go take herself to the bathroom, you know, with a walker, with her. And it was when her care was going to become more intrusive to her. And there was no way she wanted that. So she planned it all very carefully, and it worked exactly. I mean, we even got a cancellation for a funeral. So her funeral was a week later. I mean, who gets cancellations for funerals?
Well, It's not something you hear about, so I've got to admit. So, I mean, what you've said, and I know we're just sort of going to wrap this up now, is about the fact that in Sikh culture, you have a process and a plan for how a sort of you cope with the death and beyond the death and the funeral and sort of between the two, really. Now, in the UK, we have that for weddings and we have it for births. You know, people plan for a birth, you go through learning about how to cope with labour, birth, having a new baby. With weddings, again, they have a reasonably set format of how your day goes. And yet when it comes to funerals, we don't do anything. We don't put affairs in order. We don't consider the fact that actually when we're going to die, whoever is left behind. I like what you said earlier about key people, you know, because not everybody is a loved one that's dealing with it, but the key people who are having to deal with your estate, your funeral and coping, don't have the information. So I think it's something that we as a culture need to adopt.
I agree. It made everything so easy. All her affairs were in order. Everything went through very, very easily. She knew that she'd made every decision till the last moment. And that's honouring that person, that the decisions are theirs. And I mean, we could have come up with all sorts of crazy ideas. But in fact, you know, one of the things we'd said to her, there was a Sikh funeral company. Did she want to us to book them? And she said, no, not at all. She said, your grandmother went with the co-op and I'm going with the co-op. So these sort of stories just make us laugh. So when we think of her, we might be crying, but it's tears of laughter because of these mad conversations we had. Now, we wouldn't have known that. And she would have been up there looking at us saying, oh dear, you know, you haven't got that right. So it's that, you know, she stood by her duty to bring us up in very difficult circumstances and give us a future. And we owed it to her for her to have everything that she wanted in the way that she wanted. And that's what we did. No regrets, no pain, no tears. It is just, you know, my mum is here with me all the time. Every situation where I would talk to her, I know what she would say. And that's joyous, absolutely joyous.
Well, it's very good to hear that you've had that experience. Obviously, death of loved ones is so different for so many people. And I'm very aware that you and I had, although again, different circumstances, we've come out knowing that we did what they would have wanted, that in a way, again, with my mum, it's slightly different, but obviously with other people, they don't get that chance. And death can be extremely difficult, and the grief that they suffer there afterwards can be crippling. So I think both of us are very fortunate in the way that we've been able to come out of this, and hopefully having this conversation will show the differences in cultures, and maybe how more of the Sikh culture can be adopted in this regard. So we met through Soroptimists, and is there any details that you can give out if anybody's actually interested in that, working with Soroptimists, maybe joining a local group? It's very good for networking, it's very good for contacts, and you're doing good for your local community and helping women and children in the process. So can you give out some contact details for that before we finish?
Yes, the website is sigbi, sigbi.org. And if you go on there, there's ways of joining up, finding a club. But through them, I'm quite happy to be contacted personally. So I'm on LinkedIn, which is probably where most of your audience will be. So the name is quite unusual, Dishi Attwood. So look me up and I'd love to hear from you.
That's lovely. Right, well, thank you very much, Dishi. I will speak to you again soon.
Thank you, Dale. Thank you.